was a hot summer day in 1977. A 12-year-old Shoeshine boy, Emanuel Jaques, was working at the corner of Yonge and Dundas, just as he did every day.
Like many immigrant families, the whole family had to work to support the livelihood of the family, and Emanuel Jaques was no different.
But on July 28th, Jaques got an offer he couldn't refuse.
Saul Batesh approached Emanuel Jaques with an offer of $35 to help him move some equipment.
It was big money for the 12-year-old, but it ended up costing him his life. Abducted and brutally murdered. Days later, his lifeless body was found on the roof of a body rub parlor on Yonge Street.
The young Shoeshine boy had been raped for 12 hours by a group of men and then drowned in a sink full of water.
It was shocking and horrifying. This is known as Toronto the Good. And when they found this body and they heard of this story, it sent a shockwave through the whole city.
3 men, Saul Batesh, Robert Krebs, and Joseph Woods, were convicted in the young boy's death.
It was a barbaric sex killing that triggered unprecedented fury.
The murder caused an uproar in the city.
The biggest thing that happened was a massive protest on August 8th, in which members of the Portuguese community came out and called for things like bringing back the death penalty.
It forced a neighborhood that was once notoriously known as the Sex District to shut down. But many members of the public felt more needed to be done, and blame was placed on the already stigmatized LGBTQ community.
The murder of Emanuel Jaques put this idea into people's minds that homosexuality was somehow associated with pedophilia. Homosexuals were dangerous, perverted, and somehow a threat to children.
And the 12-year-old's death contributed to events like the bathhouse raids, which took place in 1981. 40 years later, retail stores now stand at 245 Yonge Street, the spot where Emanuel Jaques' body was found. But for those who remember what took place in the summer of 1977, they will forever be reminded of the murder that sparked change in one of Toronto's most iconic streets. Erica Vella, Global News.
Welcome back. 40 years ago, Yonge Street was better known as the Sin Strip, home to strip clubs, body rub parlors, but pretty much ignored by police. Now, that changed in the summer of 1977. A 12-year-old Shoeshine boy named Emanuel Jaques was brutally murdered. And this summer marks the 40th anniversary of his death. For more on that, I'm joined by Toronto LGBTQ historian Tom Hooper from our downtown studio. Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Remind us a little bit about the case back then.
Well, it's a sad moment in Toronto history. 40 years ago, on July 28th, 1977, 3 men lured 12-year-old Portuguese Shoeshine boy Emanuel Jaques away from the street corner on Yonge Street to an apartment above one of these body rub parlors, where he was tortured and sexually assaulted and murdered. The 3 assailants were captured 2 days later, but the news of this murder was horrifying to the Portuguese community. A moral panic spread across the city of Toronto, which linked homosexuality with pedophilia. Toronto's LGBTQ community was partly blamed.
All right, so what happened? As you say, it brought a lot of attention to this part of Yonge Street. What was the result of that?
Well, this resulted in a police crackdown, a morality police crackdown on the Sin Strip, which is this location of Yonge Street located downtown. This had a whole bunch of massage parlors that were raided by the morality police under the body house law. This had the effect of pushing sex workers off of Yonge Street, out of the body houses, and off of Yonge Street onto the darker corners, which made their trade far less safe.
All right, so looking back 40 years ago and the outcry that resulted from the murder of this child, how do you think that still affects us today and the way we regulate the way business is done in the sex industry?
Right. Well, I mean, as a LGBTQ historian, I can tell you that the queer community was horrified and devastated by this murder, just like the rest of the city. But we were also horrified at the fact that the community was being linked to pedophilia and was being linked to such violence. As this story played out, and as Yonge Street was cleaned up, after Yonge Street was cleaned up, the police turned their attention toward the gay community. And as a result, the body house law was used to raid gay bathhouses, starting in 1978 and then most notoriously in 1981. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, with the safety of sex workers, one of the biggest legacies, I guess, or biggest changes in the sex work industry was that 2013 Supreme Court case, which actually ruled the body house law unconstitutional. So that law that was used in the crackdown of Sin Strip is now unconstitutional.
How long do you think that sort of stereotyping of the community lasted?
Well, it didn't actually. It didn't last very long. The Portuguese community in the weeks after this moral panic actually came out and asked for calm. And in the wake of the bathhouse raids, communities from across the city rallied in support of Toronto's gay community. I think the idea that all gay people are pedophiles is something that's only believed by a marginal group of people. And even back then, there was a progressive movement away from those sorts of ideas. Although the right wing was definitely pushing us. We had this visit by Anita Bryant, the beauty queen, who came to the city of Toronto and sort of pushed her Save the Children campaign, save children from homosexuals. But ultimately, the city of Toronto didn't buy into this moral panic.
Interesting. All right, Tom, thanks for reminding us about this case and joining us today for the discussion. Tom Huber is a historian of the LGBTQ Toronto community. Thanks for that.
Thank you.